Marcus Johnson drove his black SUV slowly through the tree-lined streets of Oakwood Heights, feeling a blend of pride and caution as he approached his home. After 15 years of grinding through law school and climbing the ranks of the state's legal system, he had finally achieved two dreams: becoming the state's chief prosecutor and owning a beautiful house in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. The colonial-style home stood out with its fresh blue paint and white trim. Marcus had purchased it 5 years ago, shortly after his promotion to deputy prosecutor. The spacious yard had been the main selling point, perfect for Bailey, his golden retriever who now sat in the back seat, tail wagging as they approached home. "Almost there, girl," Marcus said, glancing in the rearview mirror at his loyal companion. As Marcus pulled into his driveway, he noticed Mrs. Westfield from across the street watching from behind her curtains. She quickly stepped back when she realized he had seen her. This wasn't unusual. Despite his professional success and careful efforts to be a model neighbor, Marcus often felt like an outsider in Oakwood Heights. He parked and let Bailey out of the car. The dog bounded happily across the lawn while Marcus collected his briefcase and the bag of groceries he'd picked up on the way home. "Beautiful dog," called out Mr. Peterson, an elderly man who lived next door and was one of the few neighbors who had welcomed Marcus from the beginning. "How was work today, prosecutor?" "Long day, but a good one," Marcus replied with a smile. "We closed the Henderson case." "I saw that on the news. Congratulations," Mr. Peterson said, giving a thumbs up. The pleasant exchange was interrupted by the sound of a door slamming 3 houses down. Diane Simmons, a middle-aged white woman with a perpetual frown and perfectly highlighted blonde hair, stood on her porch with arms crossed, staring directly at Marcus and Bailey. "Keep that animal under control," she called out, her voice sharp enough to carry down the street. "Some of us value peace and quiet around here." Bailey wasn't barking or making any noise at all, just sniffing around Marcus's front yard as she always did. "Good evening to you too, Ms. Simmons," Marcus replied calmly, having learned that politeness was his best defense against neighbors like her. Diane didn't respond. She simply went back inside, slamming her door again. "Don't mind her," Mr. Peterson said quietly. "She's been that way since the neighborhood started to change." Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Oakwood Heights had slowly become more diverse over the past decade, and some residents weren't happy about it. Later that evening, after dinner, Marcus sat on his back porch watching Bailey play in the yard. His phone buzzed with a message from his sister. "How's life in the fancy neighborhood?" she had texted. Marcus typed back, "Beautiful homes, some beautiful people, and a few who still think I'm the gardener." He put his phone down and called Bailey over, running his hand through her soft fur as she settled beside his chair. Tomorrow would bring another high-profile case, more legal challenges, and likely more side eyes from neighbors like Diane. But tonight, in the quiet of his hard-earned home with Bailey by his side, Marcus felt a moment of peace. What he didn't know was that Diane Simmons was at that very moment watching his house from her upstairs window, her mind filling with plans that would soon shatter that peace. The first sign of trouble came on a bright Saturday morning when Marcus was mowing his lawn. Bailey lounged in the shade of the oak tree, watching her owner work with loyal attention. The weekend routine had become sacred to Marcus, a time to decompress from the high-pressure cases that filled his weekdays at the prosecutor's office. As he pushed the mower across his front yard, Marcus noticed Diane Simmons marching toward his property, her face set in determination. She wore tennis whites despite never having been seen on the neighborhood courts, and oversized sunglasses that hid her eyes but not her frown. "Excuse me," she called out, waving a piece of paper. "I need to speak with you." Marcus turned off the mower, wiping sweat from his brow. "Good morning, Miss Simmons. What can I help you with?" "This is the third complaint I've filed with the HOA," she said, thrusting the paper toward him. "Your dog is a nuisance to this community." Marcus took the paper, confused. The form listed complaints about excessive barking at all hours and aggressive behavior toward residents. "I think there must be some mistake," Marcus said calmly. "Bailey is well-trained and rarely barks. She's friendly to everyone she meets." As if on cue, Bailey trotted over, tail wagging. Diane stepped back dramatically. "Keep that animal away from me," she snapped. "It tried to attack me last week when I was walking past your house." Marcus frowned. "That's not possible." Bailey was with my sister all last week while I was at the state conference in Capital City. Diane's mouth tightened. Well, it was some dog from this house. I know what I saw. I only have one dog, Ms. Simmons, and she wasn't here, Marcus replied, maintaining his composure despite the obvious lie. Perhaps you saw another golden retriever. The Hendersons down the street have one that looks similar. I know exactly which house I was passing, Diane insisted, her voice rising, and I know what kind of people try to hide behind their pet's behavior. The phrase, "what kind of people," hung in the air between them. Several neighbors who were outside had stopped their activities to watch the confrontation. I'm not sure what you're implying, Marcus said, his prosecutor's training helping him remain calm, but I can assure you, Bailey is not a problem. If you have genuine concerns, I'm happy to discuss them rationally. Diane snatched the complaint form back. I'll be taking this directly to the HOA president. Some of us have lived in this neighborhood for generations, and we're not going to let it go downhill. As she stormed off, Mr. Peterson approached from his yard. Sorry you had to deal with that, Marcus. She's been going around collecting signatures to enforce the neighborhood standards, whatever that means. Has she filed complaints about other dogs? Marcus asked. Just yours, Mr. Peterson said with a meaningful look. And coincidentally, just the house is owned by the new families who don't look like the original residents. That evening, Marcus found an anonymous note in his mailbox. Oakwood Heights has standards. Some people don't belong here. He showed the note to Bailey, who tilted her head curiously. What do you think, girl? Should we let this bother us? Bailey responded by licking his hand. Marcus smiled, but his mind was already cataloging the escalating pattern of harassment. As a prosecutor, he recognized the warning signs of someone whose prejudice was turning into dangerous action. When he checked his security cameras before bed, he noticed a disturbing sight. Diane Simmons had walked past his house 3 times that evening, stopping each time to take photos of his property with her phone. On the last pass, she had stood at the edge of his lawn for nearly 5 minutes, just staring at his windows. The tension had begun, and Marcus had a sinking feeling it would get worse before it got better. 1 month after Diane's confrontation with Marcus, the situation in Oakwood Heights had grown increasingly tense. What began as unfounded complaints and suspicious glances had evolved into something more sinister. Marcus stepped outside on Tuesday morning to find his garbage cans overturned, trash scattered across his driveway. This marked the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Though his security cameras had captured shadowy movement around 2 a.m., the footage was too dark to identify anyone clearly. This is getting ridiculous, Marcus muttered as he cleaned up the mess, careful not to be late for an important court appearance. Bailey watched from the porch, unusually subdued. The normally cheerful dog had become more cautious lately, especially during their walks. Marcus had noticed she would grow tense whenever they passed Diane's house. Later that day, Gabriela Morales from 2 doors down knocked on Marcus's door. I thought you should see this, she said, handing him a flyer. They're being distributed throughout the neighborhood. The paper featured a poorly edited photograph of Bailey with fangs photoshopped onto her mouth. Above it read, Dangerous Animal Alert. Report all sightings to HOA immediately. This is defamation, Marcus said, his professional instincts kicking in, and I'm pretty sure it violates HOA regulations about distributing unapproved materials. Gabriela nodded. Several of us have already complained to the board. We know who's behind it. That evening, Marcus was working in his home office when Bailey started barking frantically at the front window. He rushed over to find Diane standing on his lawn, phone raised, filming his house. Marcus opened the door. Miss Simmons, you're trespassing on private property. Public documentation is not trespassing, she replied without lowering her phone. I'm collecting evidence of your dog's aggressive behavior for the HOA and animal control. Bailey is inside barking because a stranger is lurking outside our home, Marcus explained, keeping his voice level despite his rising anger. That's what dogs do. It's not aggressive behavior, it's protective behavior. I've received multiple complaints from concerned neighbors about that animal, Diane insisted. And who might these neighbors be? Marcus asked. I'm not at liberty to say, Diane replied, finally lowering her phone. But they've described your dog chasing children and threatening the elderly. That's categorically false, Marcus said firmly. Bailey is certified as a therapy dog and visits hospitals on weekends. I have more than a dozen witnesses who can attest to her gentle temperament. Diane's face hardened. People like you always have excuses. People like me? Marcus repeated, his patience wearing thin. Please clarify exactly what you mean by that statement, Ms. Simmons. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Diane's face as she realized she might have said too much. Without responding, she turned and marched back toward her house. The next morning, Marcus found another anonymous note taped to his front door. Last warning. Get rid of the dog or face consequences. He immediately called the police to file a report. Officer Rivera arrived 30 minutes later, looking uncomfortable. I'll document the threat, Mr. Johnson, but honestly, there's not much we can do until something actually happens, he explained. So I need to wait until someone harms my dog before action can be taken, Marcus asked. Unfortunately, yes. The law has limitations in these situations. Marcus nodded, understanding all too well how the system worked. I'd still like the report filed. I'm building a pattern of evidence. After the officer left, Marcus installed additional security cameras around his property and ordered a more sophisticated monitoring system. As the state's chief prosecutor, he had seen how quickly situations like this could escalate from threats to violence. That night, as he sat on his back porch with Bailey beside him, Marcus made a difficult decision. He would not be intimidated into leaving his home or giving up his dog, but he would also prepare for whatever Diane might do next. Years of prosecuting criminals had taught him one vital lesson. People who started with small acts of hatred rarely stopped there on their own. The weekend arrived with perfect spring weather. Marcus had planned a rare day off to catch up on yard work and spend time with Bailey. After a stressful week handling a high-profile corruption case, he needed the peace of his own backyard. Come on, girl, Marcus called, grabbing Bailey's favorite tennis ball. Let's enjoy some sunshine. Bailey bounded across the lawn with the energy that always amazed Marcus. For a 6-year-old dog, she moved like a puppy when playtime began. He threw the ball toward the back of the yard, watching as Bailey raced after it with joyful determination. As they played, Marcus noticed Mr. Peterson waving from the fence separating their properties. Morning, Marcus. Beautiful day, isn't it? The elderly neighbor called. Perfect day, Marcus agreed, walking over. How are you doing, Mr. Peterson? Can't complain, though I should warn you. I saw Diane taking photos of your backyard earlier when she thought nobody was watching. Mr. Peterson lowered his voice. She was standing on the community path behind your fence. Marcus frowned. Did she come onto my property? No, but she was acting suspicious. Kept looking around to make sure nobody saw her. Mr. Peterson's weathered face showed genuine concern. Be careful, son. That woman has been saying some troubling things at the community meetings. I appreciate the warning, Marcus replied. Their conversation was interrupted by Bailey's sudden barking. Not her usual playful sound, but a sharp, alarmed bark. Marcus turned to see her standing near the back fence, her posture stiff and alert. Bailey, come here, girl, he called. When she didn't immediately respond, Marcus jogged over. Bailey was sniffing intently at something on the ground near the fence line. Several pieces of meat scattered in the grass. The meat looked odd, covered with a crystalline substance that glistened in the sunlight. Bailey, no, Marcus commanded sharply, pulling her away. Years of prosecuting cases had exposed him to various crimes, including animal poisoning. He recognized the warning signs immediately. Marcus quickly leashed Bailey and secured her on the porch. He returned with gloves and a plastic bag, carefully collecting the meat pieces. Up close, he confirmed his suspicions. The meat smelled strongly of chemicals. His hands shaking with anger and fear, Marcus checked his newly installed security cameras. He rewound the footage from that morning and saw exactly what he feared. Diane Simmons, wearing gardening gloves, walking along the community path behind his fence. The video clearly showed her looking around furtively before tossing several objects over his fence exactly where he found the meat. Marcus immediately called the police. While waiting, he reviewed more footage and discovered Diane had made 3 passes behind his property that morning. On her first trip, she had merely observed. On the second, she had thrown the tainted meat. The third time, she had stood watching, as if waiting to see if Bailey would find her deadly gift. Officer Rivera arrived with another policeman, both looking grim when Marcus showed them the evidence. "This is attempted animal cruelty, possibly with intent to kill," Officer Rivera said, bagging the meat as evidence. "The substance appears to be antifreeze, based on color and consistency, but we'll have the lab confirm." "I want to press charges," Marcus said firmly. "I have clear video evidence of who did this." As the officers took his statement, Marcus kept glancing at Bailey, now safely inside the house. The thought of how close she had come to eating the poisoned meat made his stomach turn, if he hadn't noticed in time. "We'll need to question Ms. Simmons," Officer Rivera said. "Given your position as chief prosecutor, we'll have to handle this carefully to avoid any appearance of special treatment." "I understand," Marcus replied. "I'll recuse myself from any involvement in the case." As the officers left to confront Diane, Marcus hugged Bailey tightly. The escalation to potentially deadly action confirmed his worst fears about where Diane's hatred might lead. What had begun as neighborhood tension had just become a criminal case, and Diane had no idea she had targeted not just any resident, but the very person who oversaw prosecutions for the entire state. The conference room at the police station buzzed with unusual energy. Detective Sarah Wilkins, a veteran officer with 15 years of experience handling animal cruelty cases, had just laid out the evidence against Diane Simmons on the large whiteboard. The security footage played on a screen behind her, showing Diane clearly tossing objects over Marcus's fence. "Lab results came back this morning," Detective Wilkins announced to the assembled team. "The meat was definitely laced with ethylene glycol, antifreeze, enough to kill a dog Bailey's size within hours." District Attorney Robert Chen nodded grimly. As Marcus's second-in-command, he had taken over the case the moment Marcus had recused himself. "We got her on video, we got the lab results, and we got a documented history of complaints and harassment," Day Chen summarized. "What's her story?" Officer Rivera flipped through his notes. "When we questioned her initially, she denied everything. Said she was just taking a morning walk on the community path. When we mentioned the security footage, she changed her story, claiming she was tossing dog treats as a peace offering." "Dog treats laced with antifreeze," Detective Wilkins scoffed. "That's the weakest excuse I've heard in years." "Has she been arrested?" Day Chen asked. "Not yet. We wanted to consult with your office first, given the sensitive nature of the case." Everyone in the room understood the unspoken concern. Marcus Johnson was the state's chief prosecutor, and any case involving him personally would draw intense scrutiny. They needed to be absolutely meticulous. "Process this exactly as you would any other attempted animal poisoning case," Day Chen instructed. "No special treatment in either direction. The evidence speaks for itself." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sat in his home office, trying to focus on other cases while Bailey napped at his feet. His phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson. "Marcus, I thought you should know. The police are at Diane's house right now. Looks like they're arresting her." Marcus thanked him for the information but offered no comment. He had deliberately removed himself from all aspects of the investigation to ensure no one could claim he had influenced the process. His doorbell rang shortly after. Marcus opened the door to find Gabriela Morales standing there with 3 other neighbors. "We heard what happened," Gabriela said. "We want you to know we're behind you. Several of us have had incidents with Diane before." "What kind of incidents?" Marcus asked carefully. James Turner, a retired teacher who had moved in last year, spoke up. "When my family first arrived, we found notes telling us this neighborhood wasn't suitable for people like us. We're the only Asian family on this block." "She reported my son to the HOA for playing basketball in our driveway," added Michael Wilson, a black doctor from down the street. "Called it disturbing the neighborhood character." "And she tried to get my landscaping business shut down," said Carlos Rodriguez. "Claimed I wasn't authorized to park my work truck in my own driveway overnight." Marcus invited them in, listening as each shared similar stories. A pattern emerged. Diane had systematically targeted every non-white homeowner in Oakwood Heights, but her tactics had escalated dramatically with Marcus. "Why didn't anyone report this behavior?" Marcus asked. "We did," Michael replied. "The previous HOA president, Diane's friend, dismissed everything as neighbor disputes." As they talked, Marcus's phone rang again. It was D.A. Chen. "We've arrested her," Chen reported. Charges include animal cruelty, attempted animal poisoning, and criminal trespassing. When we executed a search warrant on her home, we found more antifreeze and printed information on toxic substances that are harmful to dogs. Has she made any statements? Marcus asked. Nothing coherent. She seemed shocked that we were taking it so seriously. Chen paused. She kept saying she didn't understand why someone like him was being protected. After hanging up, Marcus looked at his neighbors gathered in his living room. The investigation was proceeding by the book, but the deeper issue, the prejudice that had fueled Diane's actions, would require more than just legal consequences to address. The county courthouse buzzed with unusual activity. News of Diane Simmons' arraignment had spread quickly, drawing reporters and curious onlookers. The case had struck a nerve, a seemingly ordinary neighborhood dispute that had escalated to attempted animal poisoning with troubling undertones of racial bias. Diane sat stiffly at the defendant's table, her perfectly highlighted hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a conservative navy blue dress that screamed respectable community member. Her attorney, Gerald Matthews, leaned close, whispering last-minute advice before the judge entered. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marilyn Patel," the bailiff announced. As the courtroom settled, District Attorney Robert Chen stood to present the state's case. "Your Honor, the defendant is charged with criminal trespassing, animal cruelty, and attempted animal poisoning, all stemming from an incident on April 20th where she deliberately placed antifreeze-laced meat near the fence of Marcus Johnson's property, clearly intended for his dog." Judge Patel nodded. "How does the defendant plead?" Matthews rose. "Not guilty, Your Honor. My client maintains this is all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. A misunderstanding caught on video, with forensic evidence to support the charges," Chen countered. Judge Patel reviewed the charging documents. Bail is set at $25,000. Next appearance scheduled for preliminary hearing on May 15th. As Diane and her attorney turned to leave, she froze. Her eyes widened as she spotted Marcus Johnson entering the courtroom through a side door. He had come not as a participant but as an observer, exercising his right to witness the proceedings in a case where he was the victim. "That's him," she whispered to her attorney. "That's the man with the dangerous dog." Matthews looked confused. "Mr. Simmons, that's Marcus Johnson, the state's chief prosecutor." The color drained from Diane's face. "The what?" "The chief prosecutor. He's the highest-ranking prosecutor in the state. Surely you knew who your neighbor was." Diane's stunned expression confirmed she had no idea. In her mind, Marcus had just been another unwelcome addition to her neighborhood, not one of the most powerful legal figures in the state. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed Matthews and Diane. "Ms. Simmons, did you target the chief prosecutor because of his position? Was this racially motivated? Did you know who Mr. Johnson was when you left the poisoned meat?" Matthews hurriedly guided his client through the crowd. No comment at this time. Meanwhile, D.A. Chen approached Marcus in a quiet corner of the hallway. "How did it go?" Marcus asked. "Exactly by the book," Chen assured him. "Judge Patel is known for her fairness. No special treatment either way. And the evidence? Rock solid. The video footage is crystal clear, the lab tests confirm antifreeze in the meat, and we have her documented history of harassment. Plus, 3 of your neighbors have come forward with statements about similar treatment they received from her." Marcus nodded. "Has she made any statements about her motive?" "Nothing direct, but her attorney approached me about a possible plea deal." Chen replied. "I think the reality of her situation is starting to sink in, especially now that she knows who you are." "My position shouldn't matter," Marcus said firmly. "This case isn't about me being the chief prosecutor. It's about someone who tried to poison an innocent animal because she didn't want certain people in her neighborhood." As they spoke, Gabriela Morales approached with several other Oakwood Heights residents. "We came to show support," she explained, "and to let the court know this wasn't an isolated incident." Marcus thanked them, touched by the community response. What had begun as one woman's hateful actions had unexpectedly united neighbors who might otherwise never have connected. Later that day, as Marcus drove home with Bailey safely beside him, his phone rang. It was D.A. Chen again. "Matthews called. They want to discuss plea options," Chen reported. "I think seeing you in court today realizing exactly who she'd been targeting, was a wake-up call. Marcus thought carefully before responding. Handle it as you would any similar case, Robert. Justice doesn't change based on who the victim is or who the perpetrator thought they were targeting. The story broke on local news first, then quickly spread to national outlets. White woman allegedly poisons dog, the black state prosecutor read the headlines. Within days, Oakwood Heights found itself under an unexpected spotlight. Marcus stepped out of his car after a long day at the office to find a small gathering on his front lawn. For a moment, he tensed until he recognized the faces, neighbors from across Oakwood Heights, many he knew only by sight. "What's going on?" he asked, approaching cautiously. Gabriela Morales stepped forward. "We organized a neighborhood meeting. We wanted to talk about what happened and what we can do as a community." The group had brought folding chairs and a small table with refreshments. Bailey, sensing the friendly atmosphere, trotted among the visitors, collecting pets and affection. "May I join you?" Marcus asked, touched by the gesture. "That's why we're here," Michael Wilson replied. "This affects all of us." As the impromptu meeting began, more neighbors arrived. Even Mr. Peterson had wheeled himself over, determined to participate despite his mobility issues. "First," Gabriela announced, "we want to apologize that this happened in our neighborhood. Many of us suspected Diane's behavior was problematic, but we didn't speak up forcefully enough." "You have nothing to apologize for," Marcus assured them. "You weren't responsible for her actions." "Maybe not directly," said James Turner, the retired teacher. "But a community is only as good as what it tolerates, and we tolerated too much for too long." The conversation flowed honestly, sometimes uncomfortably, as residents shared their experiences. Nearly every non-white family had a Diane story, though none had escalated to the level of Marcus's situation. "The problem goes deeper than one person," Carlos Rodriguez pointed out. "The old HOA board enabled her behavior for years." "That's why we've called for emergency elections," Gabriela explained. "We need leadership that represents everyone in Oakwood Heights." As they talked, a news van pulled up. A reporter and cameraman approached the gathering. "Mr. Johnson, Eliza Washington from Channel 8 News. We'd like to get your statement on the Diane Simmons case." Marcus politely declined an on-camera interview, but the reporter persisted. "People are calling this a hate crime. Do you believe Ms. Simmons targeted you because of your race?" Before Marcus could respond, several neighbors stepped forward. "This isn't just about one incident," Michael Wilson told the reporter. "It's about a pattern of behavior that's been allowed to continue. And it's about what kind of community we want to be," added Mrs. Klein, an elderly white woman who had lived in Oakwood Heights for 40 years. "Not all of us share those prejudiced views." As the reporter conducted impromptu interviews, Marcus watched with growing appreciation. The neighborhood was transforming before his eyes. People who had merely nodded to each other in passing were now finding common ground and purpose. Later that evening, as the gathering dispersed, Gabriela handed Marcus a document. "We drafted new anti-discrimination guidelines for the HOA," she explained. "We value your professional input, though we understand if you prefer to keep your distance from all this." "I'm happy to review it," Marcus said, as a neighbor, not as the chief prosecutor. The next morning, Marcus found a basket on his porch filled with dog treats, toys, and a card signed by dozens of residents. For Bailey, Oakwood Heights' most beloved resident, it read. At the same time across town, DHN was holding a press conference about the case. "The state takes these charges extremely seriously," he explained to the assembled reporters. "While we cannot comment on specifics of an ongoing case, we can confirm that we are investigating whether bias played a role in the defendant's actions." The story continued to spread, sparking conversations in communities far beyond Oakwood Heights. What had begun as one woman's hateful act had become a catalyst for confronting the quieter, more insidious forms of prejudice that often went unchallenged. That evening, Marcus took Bailey for their usual walk. For the first time in months, he felt completely at ease in his neighborhood as passing residents waved and called Bailey by name. 3 months after the poisoning attempt, Marcus sat in the back row of courtroom B, watching as Diane Simmons stood before Judge Patel for her sentencing hearing. The crowded courtroom fell silent as the proceedings began. Diane looked different now. Her previously perfect hair showed dark roots, and her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple gray pantsuit that hung loosely on her frame. The stress of the case had clearly taken its toll. "Ms. Simmons, you have pleaded guilty to attempted animal cruelty and criminal trespassing," Judge Paddle stated, reviewing the file before her. "Before I pronounce sentence, do you wish to make a statement to the court?" Diane's attorney nudged her forward. She approached the microphone, hands trembling slightly. "I want to apologize for my actions," she began, her voice barely audible. "I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. I never stopped to consider the pain I might cause or the harm I could have done." She paused, turning slightly to where Marcus sat. "I didn't know Mr. Johnson was the chief prosecutor, but that shouldn't matter. What I did was wrong, regardless of who he was." Judge Paddle nodded. "Mr. Chen, does the state wish to address the court before sentencing?" D.A. Chen stood. "Your Honor, the state acknowledges Ms. Simmons' guilty plea and acceptance of responsibility. However, we cannot ignore that her actions were part of a documented pattern of harassment specifically targeting minority residents in her neighborhood. The state recommends the maximum penalties allowed under the plea agreement." After considering both statements, Judge Paddle delivered her ruling. "Ms. Simmons, I sentence you to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service at the county animal shelter, mandatory completion of a bias awareness program, and $5,000 in fines. Additionally, you are prohibited from returning to Oakwood Heights during your probation period." As the gavel fell, Diane's shoulders slumped in a mixture of relief and resignation. The sentence was fair, neither overly harsh nor too lenient. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Marcus as he exited. "Mr. Johnson, are you satisfied with the sentence?" one shouted. "The justice system worked as it should," Marcus replied carefully. "This case was never about revenge. It was about accountability and ensuring this behavior doesn't continue." Later that evening, Oakwood Heights held its first community picnic in the neighborhood park. Families from all corners of the development came together, bringing food, games, and pets. Bailey had become something of a local celebrity, wearing a bandana that read Community Guardian as she greeted each new arrival. "Quite a change from 6 months ago," Mr. Peterson commented, sitting beside Marcus at a picnic table. "For the better," Marcus agreed, watching as children of various backgrounds played together on the grass. Gabriella approached with exciting news. "The new AOA board approved all our proposed guidelines unanimously. The anti-discrimination policy is now officially part of our community charter. The change in Oakwood Heights had been remarkable. What began as one woman's hateful action had sparked an uncomfortable but necessary conversation about the subtle and not-so-subtle ways prejudice had been allowed to fester in their community." As the sun began to set, residents gathered for a group photo. Marcus found himself in the center, with Bailey sitting proudly at his feet. Looking around at the faces of his neighbors, people who had become friends through adversity, he felt a deep sense of belonging. Later that night, as Marcus prepared for bed, he received an email from a law professor at the state university. She was writing a case study about the incident and its aftermath, focusing on how communities can transform in response to acts of prejudice. "Would you be willing to speak to my students about your experience?" she asked. Marcus smiled as he typed his reply. "I would be honored. This story isn't just about what happened to Bailey and me. It's about how a community chose to be better than its worst moments." As he clicked send, Bailey jumped onto the bed beside him, settling into her usual spot. Marcus scratched behind her ears, grateful for the loyal companion who had unwittingly become the catalyst for positive change in Oakwood Heights, and perhaps beyond.